Hi, my name is Phil Mailer, and I'm the author of the book Portugal, the Impossible Revolution. Unfortunately, I can't be with you today for the presentation of the German edition, which is a pity since it's also the 50th anniversary of the revolution. So Anke and Felix, the translators, have kindly agreed to make the presentation for me. But I'd just like to introduce myself very briefly and say hello and maybe talk just a little bit about my background and the book. I'm Irish, from Dublin, where I lived until 1967. At that time, I was heavily influenced by the so-called Irish literary scene and by the beat poets in America like Allen Ginsberg, Gary Snyder and Jack Kerouac. And all I wanted to be was a Dublin poet. But then I decided to move to London, where I made up with a pro-situationist group called King Mob, who introduced me to the work of Guy Debord and other situationists, as well as the notion of the spectacle, all of which I found fascinating and which introduced me to Marxist ideas, as well as anarchism, surrealism and Dadaism. Then came France, May 1968, which had repercussions all around the world. And so I went there in June that year to see what was going on. This changed my life forever. As an Irishman living in London, I was feeling isolated, and so I decided to take a course in English language teaching and go abroad, and I managed to find a job teaching English in Lisbon, Portugal. In Portugal, I settled in quite well, despite the fact that it was a fascist country. Life under fascism was brutal. You couldn't go on strike, you go on demonstrations, and the political police, the PID, were everywhere. And they used intimidation to persuade people. And if that didn't work, they used torture and imprisonment. I was lucky in that almost straight away, I met up with a group of anti-fascists who were friends of some Portuguese that I had met on a visit to the United States, and who said something was about to happen in Portugal given the cost in lives and money of the colonial wars. Of course, they were just hoping for change, and like so many others who were against the regime, were just hoping for an end to the wars. But it was to be a sentiment which had stayed with me. The 25th of April was a complete surprise to me, and which I've described as best I could in the first chapter of the book. My neighbour knocking on my door in her pajamas, shooting her fingers in the air, telling me not to go to work and to stay at home. I didn't speak much Portuguese at the time, and everyone wanted to speak English with me. But after the revolution, everyone was so busy reorganizing their lives, they just hadn't time to speak English. And so I had to learn Portuguese very fast in order to stay abreast of what was going on. The aftermath of the 25th of April brought in an exciting and very creative period in Portuguese history. The Portuguese called it the PREC, or the Ongoing Revolutionary Program, which lasted for 18 months. It's estimated that over this time, some 3 million people out of a total Portuguese population of 10 million participated in one way or another in the movement, whether on strikes, occupations, or demonstrations. 1 million hectares of land were occupied and collectivized in the south of Portugal, as well as over 1,000 factories occupied, either under workers' control or self-management. Unused buildings were taken over by the neighbourhood committees to be used as creches or other social usage in what was to be one of the richest working class experiences of the late 19th century. This lasted right up to the centre-right coup of November the 25th, 1975, which sought to install the European parliamentary democracy and to join the European economic market and to try and put a halt to the pace of the revolutionary movement. It brought in all iniquities of modern capitalism, the spectacular commodity society, widespread corruption, and the return of all occupied land to their former owners, as well as the factory owners. Of course, this book only deals with the revolutionary period of the first 18 months after the coup and what this produced by trying to examine the experiences of self-management as well as the problems raised by the cultural and feminist issues which were taking place at the time. It doesn't focus on the wider period of the so-called transition from fascism to parliamentary democracy, and which is what is now being officially celebrated in Portugal on this 25th of April. These celebrations, which are about to get started in Portugal, are really the celebrations of the social democratic coup of the 25th of November, and really an experience which the bourgeoisie would like to erase from memory and pretend that nothing had ever happened. Danke. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope you enjoyed the book.